比亚迪在马来西亚的工厂全面停工了。
BYD's first ASEAN full vehicle production base in Malaysia has come to a complete halt. The project has been stuck, and it's really disappointing.
On April 22nd, a Chinese influencer on Douyin revealed this news. He said that when BYD's team visited Malaysia early last year, multiple states were eager to attract the EV company, offering numerous incentives. Ultimately, Perak state stood out. At that time, the company felt the local government was very sincere, and they fast-tracked the project. What normally would have taken months, like land clearing and construction approvals, was all done in just 6 days. Everyone thought the project would go smoothly, but then Malaysia's Federal Ministry of Investment suddenly made a drastic change.
接下来整整10个月的协调过程中，头贸部从来没说过政策有什么变化。
During the previous 10-month negotiation period, the ministry never mentioned any policy changes or gave any warning. It wasn't until BYD officially submitted its investment application that they suddenly introduced a new policy framework, catching BYD off guard.
The policy is extremely strict. First, there's a sales limit. The local annual sales cap is only 10,000 units, and the remaining 80% must be exported. This means BYD invested heavily in setting up a factory, but it struggles to establish a strong presence in the local market, turning into an export processing base for Malaysia. Second, there's a price threshold. The minimum selling price for locally sold cars cannot be lower than around 150,000 RMB. However, popular models like the Dolphin and Auto 3, which are selling well in Malaysia, are priced around 100,000 RMB, which directly cuts off their core consumer base. Third, there are local production requirements. The proportion of locally sourced parts must reach 40%, and core processes like body welding and painting must be done in Malaysia. For a company like BYD, this would significantly increase costs, erasing any price advantage. The Malaysian federal government's intentions are clear. They want investment, technology, jobs, and exports, but they are keen to protect local automakers. Currently, the construction site is at a standstill, and BYD is reassessing its investment plans. Industry experts point out that BYD's situation this year is quite bleak. The attack on its Malaysian project is just one of the troubles. In comparison, the crisis in Europe is much more far-reaching. Recently, there has been a major shakeup in Hungarian politics. The Tisza party won the parliamentary elections with an overwhelming majority, ending a 16-year-long ruling system and marking a shift in the country's foreign policy. This change of government is not only a diplomatic setback for Beijing, but it also directly threatens China's corporate strategy in Europe. As Hungary shifts its national policies from being pro-China and pro-Russia to aligning with the EU mainstream, the special treatment Chinese companies previously enjoyed will be reassessed. Companies like BYD, which have made heavy asset investments there, now face huge operational risks. Looking back, Hungary was once seen as the golden gateway for Chinese capital entering Europe. Under the old government system, Beijing successfully positioned Hungary as the most steadfast bridgehead for the CCP in the European Union. This was not just a geopolitical alignment, but also a comprehensive economic connection. The data clearly shows that since 2025, China has been the largest source of foreign investment in Hungary for 3 consecutive years. Bilateral trade reached unprecedented levels. During this period, many Chinese companies regarded Hungary as a gateway to the European market. CATL built Europe's largest battery factory there, and BYD invested 4 billion euros to establish its first vehicle manufacturing plant in Europe. These investments were not only large in scale, but were also seen as key strategic moves for China to bypass EU trade barriers and achieve a made-in-Europe transformation. However, the outcome of this election has completely changed the game. The newly elected government has clearly stated that it will conduct a comprehensive review of existing Chinese investments, especially in the EV sector. This is a serious warning for BYD, which is in the midst of expanding in Europe. In the past, Chinese companies received substantial government subsidies and had great flexibility regarding land, water resources, and environmental regulations. But these advantages may no longer exist in the future. The new government has emphasized that future foreign investments must comply with strict EU regulations, including labor safety standards and environmental laws. The government has also made it clear that it will not accept projects that hire very few local employees while seeking large subsidies. The EU is currently discussing a draft bill that will set strict thresholds for foreign investments exceeding 100 million euros. This includes sectors such as batteries, electric vehicles, and critical raw materials from specific countries. If this bill is passed, foreign companies will not only need to hire a certain proportion of local workers, but may also face restrictions on technology transfer and ownership percentages. For BYD, which heavily relies on a vertically integrated supply chain and prefers to maintain control over its core technologies, this undoubtedly increases operational costs and weakens its competitive cost advantage in local production. From a macro geopolitical perspective, Hungary's shift symbolizes the loss of an important chess piece in Europe. In the past, Hungary often played the role of a stubborn player within the EU, using the consensus decision-making mechanism to block tougher stances against China. This strategy allowed Chinese products to bypass EU trade barriers through Hungary. However, with Hungary returning to the EU mainstream, there will be greater consensus within the EU regarding the de-risking of Communist China and positioning China as a systemic rival. The tactics that the CCP once used to divide EU forces and exchange economic benefits for diplomatic space are no longer viable. Many countries have tried to adopt a two-handed strategy between China and the US, participating in China's economic cycle while enjoying Western security guarantees. However, as US-China competition intensifies, the space for bilateral profits is rapidly shrinking. Experts analyze that decoupling between the US and China is an inevitable long-term trend, and countries' choices in production chains, market economies, and digital security will become more extreme, with clearer alignment between democratic and authoritarian systems. The Hungarian people's concerns about the direct threats of the Russia-Ukraine war, as well as their backlash against domestic authoritarianism, have led to a political consensus favoring a pro-EU route. Industry experts believe that while economic ties between China and Hungary are unlikely to be completely severed in the short term, the external environment for businesses has undergone structural changes. The new government has vowed to review all non-transparent agreements and contracts signed by the previous administration. This means that large investment projects, like those of BYD, could face administrative scrutiny, or even contract renegotiation, if they cannot prove their substantial contributions to Hungary's economy and society. For Chinese automakers, Hungary's green light is gone, replaced by more complex EU regulatory scrutiny and stricter market entry policies. According to the UK's Financial Times, the European Commission is planning to amend the provisions of the upcoming Industrial Accelerator Act. The new rules propose that at least 70% of the non-battery components of EVs, hybrid vehicles, and fuel cell vehicles must be produced within the EU. Moreover, the final assembly must also occur within the EU to qualify for EU country support or participation in public procurement. From a market entry perspective, this is a fundamental shift. In the past, tariff barriers primarily impacted product price competitiveness, while the compliance wall directly determines market access eligibility. More subtly, the bill also establishes a trusted partner list. In today's turbulent geopolitical climate, this presents a significant risk for China, as there is considerable uncertainty regarding its status. This means that Chinese carmakers will not only face pressures from tariff barriers and supply chain restructuring, but also fundamental challenges regarding their eligibility to participate in the European market. Industry experts point out that the new regulations will create a threefold impact on Chinese automakers. The first is on the cost side. Under the current policy, in addition to the existing 10% base tariff, BYD, Geely, and SAIC Group will face anti-subsidy tariffs of 17%, 19%, and 35% respectively. Some companies' overall tax rates will approach 45%. The requirement for local production means that companies will need to shift much of their parts procurement from the cheaper Chinese supply chain to Europe, further undermining their price competitiveness. The pressure caused by supply chain restructuring is even more far-reaching. Chinese automakers have long relied on a globally centralized supply chain, with advantages in fields like power batteries, electric drive systems, and power semiconductors. To meet the 70% local production requirement, a complete overhaul of the supply chain will be necessary, requiring huge financial investment under time constraints. Finally, the increased difficulty of market entry could be the most direct consequence. According to the bill's provisions, bidders owned or controlled by third-country companies that have not signed relevant international agreements with the EU will be excluded from EU public procurement eligibility. Since mainland China is not a member of the World Trade Organization's government procurement agreement, Chinese companies and their EU subsidiaries are not eligible to participate in EU public tenders governed by the Industrial Accelerator Act. Data from the first 11 months of 2025 shows that Chinese automakers in the European market saw a 95% year-on-year increase in sales, surpassing 700,000 units for the first time. Their market share nearly doubled from 3% during the same period last year. However, the implementation of new regulations will directly curb the sustainability of this growth momentum. As the leader of China's new energy vehicle sector, BYD has faced a significant setback in its overseas expansion, while its domestic performance has worsened. Recently, the China Passenger Car Association, CPCA, released data showing that in the first quarter of 2026, cumulative retail sales of passenger cars reached 4.2 million units, a 17% decline year-on-year. This marks the worst opening performance in the last decade. The entire Chinese car market is now clouded with pessimism. The most notable case is BYD, which became the global sales leader in 2025 and the top performer in new energy vehicles. Its domestic sales in the first quarter plummeted by 52%, from 790,000 units to 380,000 units. According to the 2025 financial report released by the company, 7 out of 8 listed automotive dealer groups in China posted losses, with one barely breaking even. The leading company, Zhongsheng Holdings, reported revenue of approximately 164.4 billion RMB, but a net loss of nearly 1.7 billion RMB. Yongda Auto shifted from a profit to a loss exceeding 300 million RMB, and Zhengtong Auto saw its losses widen to 2.5 billion RMB. A car salesman shared.
The entire car sales industry is now gloomy. I can tell you, no one is genuinely smiling this month. This is the worst market in the past 5 years. No exceptions. April is the off-season of off-seasons, and most major car dealerships have basically stopped purchasing.
A netizen's comment was startling. They said, "Is it possible that this year, or even the next 10 years, will be the best year for the car market?" Another said, "The factory can't sell goods because people don't have money, and workers' wages are being withheld. It's a vicious cycle."
The car industry is doomed. Now, nearly 70 models are drastically reducing prices, whether it's gas cars, electric cars, domestic brands, or joint ventures. Everything is being sold off at huge discounts.
Another vlogger said, a netizen replied, "A certain domestic brand keeps releasing new cars, but with such a large inventory, how can they avoid losses? Why can't they slow down the release and make each car better?" After the cars hit the market, within a few months, the parts for those models are already unavailable. Is that acceptable? A netizen commented, "After reading this news, I couldn't sleep. I bought the car, and then it dropped in price right after." Mr. Yang, who has been in car sales for 15 years in Tianjin, told reporters that he worked his way up from sales consultant to showroom manager, sales director, and finally general manager, but he resigned this year. Mr. Yang analyzed that after 3 years of intense competition in the car industry, there could be a huge wave of resignations in the second half of 2026. He said, "The industry is too competitive. After pushing for ultimate service and customer satisfaction, it still leads to operating losses. In the end, we might not even be able to maintain basic services. I feel very tired and anxious, and still, I'm not making much money." A car salesman in Shanxi with 17 years of experience said that selling new cars has become much harder now, and the market is far worse than before. He said, "There are too many salespeople, but customers have decreased by 60%. This year, the car sales industry is struggling, and many domestic 4S stores will be shutting down." A saleswoman, Xiao Ning, who works in Guilin, revealed that her boss ran off with the funds, and she hasn't been paid yet. She's currently unemployed. She said, "The boss ran off because other brands went bankrupt, and this caused a break in the cash flow, affecting all the stores under the group. Now the boss is gone, and the executives are saying nothing, just stalling and holding up the employees. The boss had over 20 stores and managed several brands, but now all the employees are unemployed." An experienced sales staff pointed out that there is a general phenomenon in the market now. Consumers seem to have stopped buying cars, and this situation is quite severe. Domestic consumers have been spoiled by the industry's vicious competition. Right now, car companies' room for price reductions is near the cost limit, and any further reductions will lead to selling at a loss. Yet, consumers still believe that car prices are too high and continue to wait. Rather than taking the risk of buying, they would rather wait it out. This deadlock is causing the market to stagnate. Many bloggers have also observed that by April 2026, the public's mindset has become more conservative. If you have a car, just make do with it. Test drives are few, and deals are even rarer. Dealers are facing the dilemma of price inversion, where selling one car leads to a loss. Large inventories are piling up, occupying already tight cash flow. For dealers, selling cars at a loss and not selling at all both lead to losses. Analysts pointed out that China's automotive circulation sector is mired in losses. The sharp decline in sales is due to multiple factors, not just one. Last year's vehicle purchase tax policy brought forward sales of millions of units, but after the policy ended, customer confidence collapsed, and people became more cautious about big-ticket purchases. Additionally, with new cars flooding the market and chaotic price cuts, consumer confidence has been further shaken. The more consumers worry about prices continuing to drop, the less likely they are to buy a car. The deeper reason for the downturn in China's automotive market is closely tied to the continued decline of the overall Chinese economy. Consumption downgrading has been ongoing for years due to soaring unemployment, shrinking incomes, and insufficient consumer confidence. As a major consumer good, cars are more vulnerable to market shocks. In the 2026 car market, the general consensus among ordinary people has become, cash is king, wait it out. However, despite BYD's difficulties, many Chinese media outlets and online commentators are still hyping its overseas expansion capabilities. They claim that BYD's overseas sales are still growing rapidly in the first quarter of this year. In response, one netizen offered a sharp analysis. Why has BYD's domestic sales plummeted while its overseas sales are growing? This is because foreign consumers haven't had the chance to drive BYD cars for a long period. Since there is a certain level of market penetration abroad and consumers understand what BYD cars are really like, their sales will naturally follow the same path of decline. This is what's known as the lag effect.